What is up, bros? We Josh here, and welcome to Chapter 5, Episode 3 of our Road to Tier 10 series. Our series, we go down every line in World of Warships from the lowest tier all the way to the highest tier to see if we learn anything new along the way. And let's just say we now have the Grosse Kurfürst, the Tier 10 on the German battleship line, and this line has been the biggest roller coaster of emotions, some highs, some lows, but we got to learn a ton of new things, and really it was a lot on the later end. The mid tiers, there was some learning there, but mainly on the higher end, we learned to love, we learned to hate, but we definitely learned to be some German battleships. We have the GK now, so that means let's go over the tier 8, the tier 9, and of course the tier 10, and show you some gameplay as well. But the GK is a nice icing on the cake. It is a good light at the end of the tunnel, because trust me, yes, maybe the German battleship lines aren't the best overall battleship line, but the GK, if you love brawling battleships, if you love secondaries, if you love just fun battleships overall, I really enjoy this ship. However, we started our journey in this episode with the Bismarck, the tier 8, a tried and true battleship that many of us have played with. And this one was an interesting one for me. We played a lot with the Bismarck, and going into this line, there was a couple ships that I was really interested to see how they performed. Now, obviously, we played this whole line before on the main account, but that's the best part about this Road to Tier 10 series, is revisiting this line and playing through it all the way. But mainly the ones I was interested in is the Gneiss now, as we saw in the last episode, but the Bismarck was one I was interested to see how it played and if I really enjoyed it. Now, the Bismarck overall was pretty solid, but it took me a little while to kind of get into how I was supposed to play this ship. And what I mean by that is I was extremely aggressive in this ship, and you can kind of see if I click on the Bismarck stats right here. Yeah, I was pretty aggressive. Let's just say that. 51% win rate on the much lower end of that spectrum, 80,000 average damage, but this is a ship that at that point, I had some decent captain specs. I think I had like a 14 point at that point, so I was kind of rolling in full secondaries. I think we had fire prevention AFT, we used the legend, or the module for the extension on the secondaries as well, and it took us a few games. It took us 49 games to get through, but I think a lot of this was me just kind of getting bored with this ship, not in like a real negative way. I don't know how I can say I got bored with the ship in a positive way, but I felt like I wanted to get in there and brawl. I wanted to do Bismarck things. So this probably took us a few extra games. As you see, Richelieu still faster, or the Richelieu took us 52 games, where the Bismarck took us only 49 games, 80,000 on the Bismarck for the average damage. I think honestly on the lower end, but I wanted to do Bismarck things throughout the entire time of playing it, and the Richelieu only having 75, almost 76k. So Richelieu, known as being one of the weaker at this tier anyway, so the Bismarck obviously getting there. And I think one of the things that really pushed in is what I was doing damage to. The Richelieu, I was doing a lot of damage to battleships and cruisers. The Bismarck, I was probably doing a little bit more damage against DDs, so obviously a little bit higher XP, but I think I easily could have gone through a little bit faster on this ship, but still was a lot of fun. But I definitely just wanted to get in there and just kind of push through. So we had a lower win rate, about 9% compared to the Richelieu, and then we did it in less games. So, and maybe if I would have maybe tried a little bit harder when it came to this ship, and maybe didn't quite go as maybe YOLO, if you will, with this ship. But I mean, come on, when you give me a ship with secondaries, I'm gonna go and use the secondaries. Still felt some weakness when it came to the Bismarck, and there were plenty of salvos kind of like this, but overall the ship was kind of what I remember. Now, I think for a lot of people, if they went back through this line and played it, the Bismarck would maybe, I don't want to say it, would maybe be a bit of a letdown. The power creep has definitely hit the battleship line. I mean, you're going to start going against things like the Vladivostok, the Lenins, a whole bunch of new kind of HE spamming ships against CBs. You're pretty mediocre. The overall secondary build of this ship and this line has kind of gone in the wayside. So you don't quite get rewarded as much when you are pretty hyper aggressive. You can make plays. I was able to make some plays in this ship and overall had a good time in this ship, but definitely you could tell that the Bismarck has started to age a little bit, and not in a good way, and really this line has not seen, and kind of the good side, I think, of this line is kind of over, even with the little bit of buffs to secondaries to the Bismarck and whatnot. Really just there were definitely ships that I wish I was in. I wouldn't quite call the Bismarck a carry ship. Having its smaller guns on its artillery definitely were starting to be noticeable against other certain ships, and really overall the inconsistency of the guns was quite noticeable. I mean, there were games we probably would have just won if we were in a better battleship. But is the Bismarck still fun? It still was. I mean, whenever you're pushing in and you're getting a ton of secondary hits and you're getting a bunch of just a bunch of numbers that you don't even have control over, but they're just secondary numbers, that's a lot of fun. Now, when we went through this captain, this is obviously not the captain we had. I believe we had fire prevention, and I believe we had AFT. So we didn't have an as we go through this series, we always start with the lowest tier with a 0-point captain and then go all the way up. So I think at tier 8 at this point, we had some games where it was we didn't have like a manual fire on secondary. So I think this would have been a lot more fun, but obviously we didn't have the captain. We also didn't have a couple things. We kind of had like a normal setup at that point. But still, the Bismarck, I think overall pretty fun, but definitely has not aged the best. And at tier 8, if you can get top tier, you're still going to be extremely strong. But I mean, we all know tier 8 matchmaking as well. It's not the easiest, so I had to play pretty passive. And when you have to play passive with the German battleship, you tend to not do too much. So overall, I guess the Bismarck was a bit of an eye-opener for me. Not quite as fun as we all remember, but definitely still a solid ship if played correctly. I think I was probably a tad too aggressive, which took us a little bit longer to get into and a little bit longer to get through the ship. But overall, definitely still worth playing through and had some decent amount of fun. So following the tier 8 Bismarck, going right into the tier 9, this is definitely the biggest hurdle and the one I was most nervous about, which is the tier 9 FDG, the Freddy de Grob, the Freddy de Grossa. I know tons of people in the comments will definitely correct me on everything I said, so I might as well just say them all and cover my bases. But tier 9, it tends to be a quote-unquote hurdle ship, and what I mean by that for mini lines is a tier 9 or some of the higher end lines tend to have a ship that's kind of mediocre, and this is one that if you've ever gone through this line, this is one that people remember about being terrible. And that's how it really started with me. The Freddy was a rough one to get through. This is one that actually took me a long time. That's why there's such a it's been months, I think, since the last episode of this, because the Freddy was a ship that took a long time to get through for me because I just stopped playing it after a while. We can go check out the stats, and the stats were actually pretty decent for this ship. Getting through the tier 9, because of how I started to play it. So the Freddy ended up having a 70% win rate and ended up having almost just over 95k average. That was even rising as we were going. Took me 61 games to get through, as we compare it to another tier 9 battleship, the Alsace, which took us 64 to get through. And the Freddy, 61. It was a little bit faster than the Alsace for me. And one of the main things, and I did an entire video on this, and I'll put a link down below, is the gun type. So one thing we did on the Freddy, and this is something that was interesting to learn and kind of see as we were going through, is we kind of gave up on the secondary builds. And I think that's pretty important to get through this ship. But one of the things I made a video on was the difference between the 406s, which are smaller caliber guns, but you have a faster reload, overall smaller damage, and the 420s, so bigger caliber shells, obviously bigger amount of alpha damage, but slower reload. And the ship itself was pretty rough. If you've ever played the Freddy, you know that the ship is pretty inconsistent. So this is something I went with and just said, hey, I'm going to plan to play this ship like a full-blown kind of battleship. I'm not going to get too aggressive, because if I get too aggressive, I'll have the same thing with the Bismarck, not that good of results. And I just kind of treated it like a different ship, and I think you almost have to do that. So it doesn't make Freddy this weird kind of anomaly of the German line where you get into those higher end and the full-blown secondary builds, yet fun, aren't super effective. So you just have to embrace what the game is. So instead of getting that extra range on the secondaries, 20%, which would have got us, way out there into the 10 kilometer plus range, we went with the aiming system and we went full guns. And when we ended up changing from the 406s to the 420s, the Freddy doesn't hit things consistently. And this is something I went over in the video itself. The Freddy doesn't hit things consistently. So, but when we change to the 420s, when we start hitting things, it is the hits are going to be much harder. This is something that helped raise our damage a lot when it came to it, and I think was something that made me start to enjoy the ship a lot more. So changing up our complete process of how we were supposed to play this. Now, it did kind of lose its identity as a German battleship where, yes, I'm loud and proud and I have my secondaries and eat them. Now, there are situations where you can still push in this ship and make plays, and that is something we did on a regular basis, but you had to kind of pick and choose those options a little bit more because I knew I didn't have that mass secondary range where the Freddy kind of normally has it in that 10 to 11 kilometer range with all the buffs. But the Freddy was a ship that I hated at first. I thought I would hate at first, and kind of started, I wouldn't quite say enjoy at the end, but we had some streams where I was trying to do kind of like slowly slowly get through the entire ship, and okay, we'll do a little bit today, and we play all these live on twitch.tv. Come check us out and hang out. Slowly got through a little bit of the ship each day, and then once I got to the end and I changed it up to the 420s, I honestly started to enjoy the ship a little bit more. I played, started to play 10, 12, 15 games in a stream of the ship and started to get a lot of progress, and we kind of knocked out the last overall 2/3 of the progress in just a few days. I actually started to like the ship a little bit. So the Freddy one was a big eye-opener for me because I was expecting to like the Bismarck, but I was expecting it to be a little weak, and I was expecting to hate the Freddy and it be weak. It honestly switched. I enjoyed the Freddy much more than I enjoyed the Bismarck, and I think that it's definitely worth going back and maybe checking out the ship itself. Now, is the Freddy obviously one of the best ships at this tier? No, not at all. The Freddy is definitely on the lower end still, but this is one that if a lot of people ask, hey, is it worth playing the Freddy? Is it worth going through it? Should I use free XP? I think if you fully upgrade the ship, it's honestly not that bad. It really isn't. We ended up, though, averaging about 95k damage with a decent amount of XP. Again, 70% win rate at a tier 9 solo queue battleship I thought was pretty freaking good. 61 games, and comparing that to the Alsace, a little bit lower on the damage, but a little bit higher on the win rate, which a little bit faster on the games. So these were honestly pretty close. I mean, just a couple games off, and obviously a couple wins here or there would have probably changed the Alsace to be pretty fast, just as fast game-wise. So pretty close there overall, and I think the Freddy was a big kind of shock to me about how much I really honestly enjoyed the ship at the end. So one of the big eye openers, and that's something I really enjoy about this series, is kind of going, that's actually not too bad. But then we got there. We finally got there, and this is a ship, I would say it's up there near one of my favorite ships to play at tier 10. We're finally at the Grosse Kurfürst. So it was a wonderful series. The Grosse Kurfürst, a fantastic tier 9, and I will probably end up doing a video on this, but people may ask, so you're using the 420s on the Grosse Kurfürst like you use on it? Nope, I actually use the 406s on the Grosse Kurfürst, and the reason being is the Grosse Kurfürst is just way more consistent on its shells. It's pumping out 12 shells per salvo compared to 8, and I think just consistently is pretty key. As you see, I'm running the lower caliber and I'm running the secondary, not the aiming system. So the Freddy, to me, I think you kind of have to play it differently. I think you kind of play it like a standard mediocre battleship, and then when it needs to be German, you make that German push and you use your secondaries then. So the Freddy and the GK, I think, very similar in ways, but I think you have to play them differently. I think the GK is something you can really, you can use its guns and be consistent with those guns and get those big hits, and I think consistently get those big hits. But at the same time, if you need to push and get aggressive with the GK, you can do that. You can get more aggressive because it can just tank better. It has a bigger health pool. It has insane heals. It has the hydro. It has the secondaries just popping off everywhere. You can do a lot of that. And really, I think just the guns being more consistent really makes the Grosse Kurfürst so much better, and you will really enjoy this ship. And if you are slogging through this line, maybe you're not liking the Gneiss now, the tier 7, the Bismarck isn't quite as good as you've heard people talk about, and so that's a bit of a problem. The Freddy, maybe not as good as you were hoping for. But don't worry, the GK is worth it. I think this line is definitely worth. Now, has the line aged that well? Honestly, no, it hasn't. The line and the secondary life that this ship and the ship line brings has definitely not aged over time, and is something that we'll remember as being a very strong source of damage and a strong type of playstyle, but really has not kind of kept up to date with things like the Russian battleships, the buffs to certain battleships, the type of ships that are just being added into the game. It doesn't quite serve it. But I mean, if there's ever a type of ship you want close within that 10 kilometers, I think it's going to be some type of German battleship, because they are definitely going to get in there, use those secondaries, use those guns, use the ability to basically be almost citadel-less, I guess, because of the turtleback armor, and really getting through this line and using it. So what people ask me all the time on the not French battleships, the German battleships, if they should use free XP. Again, my recommendations for using free XP is to not skip ships, but to fully upgrade ships. Playing through any ship in this game really isn't that bad, but playing through stock ships can be quite painful. So one of the main things whenever I recommend is, when I was even playing like the Freddy, was getting gun range increase was pretty massive on that. Getting the hull increase is pretty good. Propulsion you can hold off on, but just getting simple things like a little bit more range and a little bit more health, this is definitely worth it to use some free XP on. Get you a little bit of a head start. Mainly even just getting a little bit extra range will kind of make your games go a bit quicker. But skipping over an entire ship, that's a lot of free XP. You can use that elsewhere. You can use that in upcoming things. So I definitely wouldn't blow through an entire ship. Play a little bit each day and you'll get through it. But overall, the high tier was kind of an eye-opener. Again, the Bismarck, really not as good as I recommended. Definitely wasn't able to carry many games that I could have, probably into some other ships, but if done correctly, it was still a blast to play, and definitely one I think we will all kind of just hang on to over time, and definitely I would probably leave it as a keeper and just play in there. The Freddy, a big eye-opener, much more fun than I remember, and once we figured out that the 420s were definitely pumping out way more damage, our damage skyrocketed. Basically, we went to about 75,000 average damage with the 406s to about 95,000 average damage. And that was continuing to climb. We were consistently getting over 100k. I bet you if you would have played just a few more games, we would have been over 100k average damage. So the Freddy really able to start pumping out that damage, but you can't really play it like a German battleship. It's kind of this weird hybrid, if you will. It's this weird ship at tier 9. And then obviously getting to the GK, having this ship, and then definitely loving playing it. So much fun, mix of secondaries, mix of great guns, decent AA. It's just an overall fun ship and definitely worth the grind. But this one was awesome. Definitely enjoying this Road to Tier 10 series, and the German battleships are done. Let me know in the comments below what you want the next line to be. We're currently working on the French cruisers. That'll be the next line, but I'd like to do 2 lines at once. So let me know in the comments below which line you would love to see. You can go back and see which ones we already did, and just vote for something. We'll pick one of the lines and we'll start it up in the next little bit. But anyways, guys, that's it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of the German battleship line, and do you like it, love it, hate it, have you not even done it? That's always something I'm interested to hear too. That's it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Remember, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.